I'm my spot here again. I also had a little bit of experience in the theater in college, so I learned about finding your spot.
No, you have to find the light. Yes. Play the light, we call that. Yeah.
For the little tape right here.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Frist Center Salon Series seminar, our first one of the academic year. I'm Kayvon Stassen. I direct the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation. Welcome back. I recognize many familiar faces. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation is an academic research center in the School of Engineering in partnership with the Business School here at Vanderbilt. Our mission is to engineer technologies and transform the workplace for autistic adults and other people, other neurodivergent people inspired by neurodiversity. As a part of what we do, we invite scholars from across the Vanderbilt community and beyond to affiliate with us as faculty fellows and faculty and staff fellows and affiliates. I'm happy to tell you that one of our most recent fellows to join us as an outside fellow is Dr. Thorp, who is our featured guest today. Roughly once a month, we host these Salon Series seminars to really feature the work of our faculty and staff fellows and affiliates. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to be doing a fireside chat style conversation with Dr. Thorp, and that conversation will be led by Dr. Amy Whiteloff. Let me just briefly introduce them, and then we'll spend our time in conversation. Dr. Holden Thorp became editor-in-chief of the Science family of journals in 2019. He came to Science from WashU, where he was provost from 2013 to 2019. He's currently a professor at George Washington University, and as I mentioned, serving as editor-in-chief at Science. He joined WashU after spending 3 decades at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he served as the 10th chancellor from 2008 to 2013. Holden earned a Bachelor of Science degree from UNC, a doctorate in chemistry from Caltech, and did his postdoctoral work at Yale. He holds a number of honorary degrees and fellowships, including as a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Inventors, among others. He has co-founded a successful pharmaceutical that has achieved FDA approval for a drug being marketed by Mycovia. He's also a venture partner at Hatteras Venture Partners and a consultant to Ancora and Urban Impact Advisors, and he's on the board of directors of PBS. Thank you, Holden. He is also an author of 2 books, and part of the subject of today's conversation is his plan to write a 3rd book soon. But the books that he's written so far include Engines of Innovation, the Entrepreneurial University in the 21st Century, and Our Higher Calling, Rebuilding the Partnership Between America and Its Colleges and Universities, both published by UNC Press. Dr. Amy Whiteloff is an associate professor of pediatrics and the associate director of research at Triad, an autism research outreach and training institute here at Vanderbilt Medical Center. She's one of the original Frist Center for Autism and Innovation Fellows and is a member of our advisory board. She's also a licensed clinical psychologist whose practice focuses on autism identification for complex and medically underserved patients. Her research interests center upon strategies for making autism diagnosis more accessible and supportive, including developing new technologies, measures, and processes that incorporate the input of autistic people and their families. And she's also the parent of 2 autistic adults. Amy has prepared a set of questions and talking points to engage Dr. Thorp in today's conversation. And gonna leave it to you, and we should have some time at the end as well for questions from the audience. Amy, thank you. Welcome, Holden.
Great. Thanks, Kayvon. Thank you so much for the introduction, Holden. Thank you so much for being here today. We're really excited to talk with you about your different experiences. I know that we also have a lot of people attending via Zoom, so if you have questions for Dr. Thorp, please put them in the chat. We have somebody here that will read them off, and we anticipate having plenty of time at the end. And like Kayvon said, we also welcome questions from the audience as we go. So I'd like to start by hearing about the new book that you're working on. Tell me about it and how it came about.
Yes, well, so I have been on a journey with autism the last 10 years, really. I got my diagnosis when I was the provost at Washington University in St. Louis, where you know, it really gets to what you're working on because I mainly got it because I was in a situation where I had access to a lot of resources that I wouldn't have had many other ways. I mean, because I had such a high position, I had a 360 review that was done by a psychologist who was qualified to also discuss my mental health with me. And that led to the first time I found out that I was on the spectrum. I didn't talk about it except for 6 years. So I spent 6 years knowing I was on the spectrum and doing a very demanding job, and coming up with euphemisms like I know I'm hard to read, or please tell me exactly what you want to get out of this meeting, because if you're just here to vent, I won't know that. Things like that. So I learned these little tricks. And then I went to a disability conference just because I was the editor of Science, not because I was autistic. And I met Dave Caudell, the great Dave Caudell, who's on our Zoom with us, who was one of the first people I'd met who was an advocate for autism, and AJ Link from ASAN was also there. And after I met those guys, I started thinking maybe I would start talking about the fact that I was autistic. And when I did, the response was way bigger and more interesting and exciting than I expected. So a publisher friend of mine asked me if I wanted to consider doing a book about this. She's at HarperCollins.
Yeah.
And so we started batting things around, and what I felt there wasn't a really good example of was a book that would be the first book you would read when you first found out that you might be autistic if you were an adult. And I think Tim impressed on me today when we were talking that there's also not a book about there's not enough scholarship on people who have jobs in management who are on the spectrum. And I was the chancellor of UNC Chapel Hill when I was undiagnosed. I was the provost of Washington University when I was diagnosed but not disclosed, and then I disclosed. So I've been through all these different permutations. So the book is a third science. Since I'm the editor of Science, I get a lot of these people to talk to me. And so it'll have the genetics and the brain scans and and a lot of behavioral stuff as well. A third memoir, my life story as I've dealt with all these things. And then a third kind of journalism about the autism world and all the disagreements and the history and the personalities that can inspire the people who are reading it. And it won't take a strong view that says this particular way of thinking about autism is correct, so that when you finish it, if you want to go read Unmasking Autism and make autism TikToks and be a self-advocate, you can go do that. And if you want to go help raise money for medical research, you can do that. And most people are probably going to be in between somewhere. But it's really honoring giving them information so that they can decide where they fit in this whole story. So,
That's great because as you were just describing, it's such a complicated landscape and many well-meaning people step into it without realizing that their opinion is going to be very vastly different from the opinion of 8 of the 10 people in the room that they're
Right.
addressing. And so that sounds like that could be a really helpful primer and introduction for people who are newly diagnosed, but then also for professionals who work within that field. You have talked briefly about your diagnostic journey. I'm going to ask you some more questions about that in a minute, but some of the people listening or watching us on Zoom might not know that you publicly disclosed that you are autistic within the Journal of Science and an editorial
yes.
that you published, which I read and it was incredible. And you had briefly mentioned the feedback, but I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about what that feedback was like, where it came from, how it felt for you after you took such a
Yeah.
huge step.
Yeah, so by the time I took the step, I'd sort of test driven it a few times.
Yeah.
You can probably tell my vocal tone doesn't modulate very much. And over the years of my teaching evaluations, I get Dr. Thorp is a great teacher and I love this about the class, but boy, he sure is monotone. And especially if I get going on, one of my fixated interests, which if you're teaching, that happens a lot.
Mhm.
I can really like lose eye contact and just, and so, my first test drive and the same psychologist who did my diagnosis, she advised me that this was a good way to try it. I got up my first day of class. I said, "Hey, everybody, I'm Dr. Thorpe. Here's the syllabus and all this. And by the way, I'm autistic, so my vocal tone doesn't modulate that much. And I'll try to make the content so interesting that's okay." And it was like a huge weight was lifted off of my shoulders because these teaching evaluations that had always said, and when I was a chancellor at UNC, everybody noticed this and I got sent to all these coaches who were trying to made me read Casey at the bat and underline different words and try to emphasize them. And whenever I did it, my wife said, "You look like such a fool trying to do that." And so this was like, I don't even have to worry about this anymore.
Yeah.
And of course, the students, in today's world were unbelievably supportive of that. And then one came up and said, she was on the spectrum and it meant so much to her that I disclosed that. And then the next thing, a few more talks, I do this. And then, so I was by the time I wrote the piece in Science, I'd already talked to a lot of experts on other autistic people. And so it didn't seem like that big of a step. It looked like one, I'm sure. But my editor, we worked hard on it. And actually one interesting nuance to the whole thing was about 2 weeks before we published it, I testified in Congress in a very tense hearing.
Yeah.
And we had the piece ready to go before I got called. And we decided maybe it's better to wait until after the hearing, just so we know if there's any fallout or anything. So, so we had planned it pretty carefully. Yeah, the response, then I started, I know all of you get these, my child was, I found out my child was autistic and I think I am too, or,
All the time.
I'm in my lab and, now, I want to talk to you more about whether I should disclose to my advisor or what. I mean, now I just get, we all do, I know, just so many messages and most of them are just, even though some of them are very difficult, also inspirational. And so, that's just kind of how this whole thing is built. And when you're the editor, like I said, when you're the editor of Science, most people will talk to you. And so, I've just gotten to meet so many of the inspirational, important people in the field, just like I am today. So it's been awesome.
I'm happy to hear that most of the feedback has been positive. I'm gonna follow up on that
Mhm.
a little bit later. As you talk about some of the challenges you faced and really what sound like some of the struggles you had when you were in these leadership positions and getting this feedback that you weren't presenting yourself in the right way, right, or the correct way, and you talk about this as well in your editorial and on your Substack. Do you think, looking back, that knowing at that point that you were autistic would have been helpful to you? And if so, in what way? Or if not, why not?
Yeah, so, most of the way coming up as a child and in graduate school and all that, I don't know how much of a difference it would have made. I mean, there was no chance I was gonna be diagnosed as a child because I would have been an Asperger's diagnosis if I was born between whatever it was, 71 and 2013. But I was in the sixties, so there was no Asperger's in those days. And so there was no chance I was gonna be diagnosed as a child. Um, graduate school and all, I mean, well, almost everybody I talk to says, oh, the reason to get a diagnosis is if you're struggling and you need help. So, when I got into the big time leadership jobs, that's when it would have been helpful to have known sooner. I probably wouldn't have disclosed, given what a public role I was in. We'll never know the answer to that. But I mean, I had, and see, the thing is, I mean, coming up, I was mostly accomplishing things people told me to accomplish.
Right.
Yeah. So when somebody said, you're the chair of chemistry, we need to build these buildings and you need to get the gifts for it and you need to get the plans done and here's what success looks like. I can do that better than almost anybody or as well as anybody. But when you start to get in, and so I could put a lot of points on the board that drove my career, in terms of the accomplishments. But then when you get to be really, especially the biggest boss there is, you have to make a lot of decisions based on incomplete information.
Mhm.
You have to do a lot of things with persuasion and the way that you engage with people.
Lots of mediation.
You have to go into, crowded rooms where everybody wants to talk to you. And you have to try to have something that's impossible for me, a short conversation with somebody that you know how to end so that you can get to the next one. And I would come home from those and just crawl in a ball and get on the floor. I was so,
Yeah.
or I'd just run into the bathroom and shut the door. And so, yeah, those things were all hard. And, so if I'd known where it was coming from, would I've managed it differently? Maybe. Yeah. We'll never know the answer to that, but hopefully some people who read about my struggles doing that will benefit from that.
I'm sure that they will.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk a lot about here at Vanderbilt, and especially at the Frisch Center, is this term neurodiversity and the neurodiverse experience and neurodiverse advantage. And I'm curious about what that word means to you, because you're fairly unique in that you not only have lived experience of a late diagnosis of autism, but then you've also had pretty rare access to some of the top autistic thinkers and then autism researchers really in the country. And so I'm curious, is neurodiversity, is it an identity? Is it a social movement? Is it a sign of societal progress? I
Yeah.
might not be able to pin you down on it, but I'd love your
Well,
thoughts about
I
that
think
term.
there are people who think it's all those things for sure. I think in my view, so like, as you point out, I'm the editor of Science. A lot of the very medical model papers on autism are ones that are in my journal or, are published by people that I worked with when I was at WashU or UNC Chapel Hill. And I love reading all that stuff. So all the genetics and the brain scans, I mean, to me, that's a pursuit of scientific truth. And that's a reality there. But at the same time, my personal experience, you know, as somebody who is on the verbal part of the spectrum without an intellectual disability, with relatively low support needs, is very much in the realm of people who would be more likely to identify with the neurodiversity movement. And in my opinion, there's more agreement about all this than people realize. I think there's a lot of there are a lot of loud voices, but I think most people that I've met are just trying to figure out how to get from one day to the next, how to cope with the situation that they have, how to take care of the people that they might be taking care of. And a lot of the controversy is something that only a relatively small portion of the community is engaged in. And then when I talk to prominent people in, you know, the different camps, they actually agree when they're talking with me on more things than they might when they're performing or when they're, you know, posting on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. I mean, I think the profound autism advocates, they may be reluctant about it, but they recognize that, for example, you know, the part of the spectrum that I would be on, the old Asperger's part, is a real phenotype, that there are real genetics and real brain differences that are there, that you know, there are many traits that truly are on a continuum that goes all the way from profound autism to you know, where I might be. And then I think the neurodiversity advocates are also aware that, you know, we need to do more to include the people who might not always be included in research because they need so much support, and that's an important thing, and that there are genetic differences between people who have different levels of support, need different levels of support. So, and I mean, I guess I'm personally very, I can understand where people are coming from all these perspectives.
Right.
Now, maybe that's because I'm new, right? And so I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I guess I mean, obviously there's huge political challenges, but in terms of the world of the people who are really thinking about autism every day, I see more compassion and cooperation maybe than you would see if you just came to it from the outside. And as far as what neurodiversity is, to me, it's the fact that we have different ways of thinking. Maybe all people have different ways of thinking. Maybe there aren't really that many neurotypical people after all. And that a better acceptance of those things and less stigma and less expectation that's based on, you know, these very idealized neurotypical stereotypes, that we'd kind of be better off without any of those, to be honest with you, for almost everybody.
I think that's a great point, you've done a great job of walking a very careful tightrope
Yeah,
between these different domains and different fields. I know that we hear a lot from especially the family members of people with either with more profound autism or maybe with autism that is less profound, but still very impactful
Mhm.
in other ways. And I like your perspective and your description of how, yes, there's so much that you accomplished, but there was also still a point in your life where you realized that you needed help and that help went beyond maybe what other people in commensurate positions needed. And thinking about how that fits into this idea of neurodiversity that you've described, where it's about what's the pathway that the person wants to follow or needs to follow, and how do we get them there? And that being the idea of recognizing the individuality or the strengths, the uniqueness of that person and getting them where they need to go, in spite of the variability, and what those paths might look like. And I'd love to follow up, if it's okay, with what you were talking about, when it comes to some of the science that comes out, right? Because that's an interesting tightrope for some of us who are clinicians and scientists to walk as well. When we think about neurodiversity and celebrating autistic strength and difference, but then also being a part of a research study that looks at genetic or environmental contributors or causes of autism, and how we, as scientists and as clinicians and as advocates or self-advocates, maybe not defend, it's maybe not quite the right word, but describe the purpose of that research or the necessity of that research. And I'd love it if you could speak just a little bit more to how that fits in with your view of yourself and autism and diversity, but then also the science, right?
Right.
That needs to be out there.
yeah, so, I mean, part of it is my bias, description of nature, that converges on truth and reality. I mean, that's what I've devoted my life to. So if people are people's brains are different, then understanding why and how is a natural scientific quest. And so the genetics and the brain scans and the tracking eye movements and but also the behavioral part. I mean, all of these things are describing a reality. And a true Socratic quest for reality is one where you're just as happy if you're right as you are if you're wrong. Because the truth should be the winner. Right? And if you read my inbox, you'll see most scientists don't really think that way. They want to be right. And when somebody says they're not right, they tend to debate rather than actually searching for the truth. There's an autistic philosopher named Agnes Callard, who is a very interesting character. And she wrote a book called Open Socrates, which is all about how Socrates would work on a lot of things. But the part on politics and science and everything is all about, once you start arguing over who's right, you're not actually looking for the truth anymore. You're having a debate that has a winner. And a true search for the truth, the only winner can be the truth. And humans have a very, very hard time doing this, maybe impossible. So understanding the truth of why our brains are different and how they get that way and what it means about our behavior, the medical model and the social model and the all that goes away, because there's only one reality. And so I'm always going to be excited about finding that. Now, I understand why I understand the objections to looking for it. And I think it's just gonna require more cooperation and compassion and interaction for us to manage the fact that ultimately, you know, there are truths out there about how all this works. That we have to somehow accommodate into the same way we handle our interactions with each other and taking care of people and helping them manage things. So, you know, like, I would love to know either behaviorally or, and I think I asked you this, I've asked everybody this. For example, you know, I worry a lot, and I worried a lot about this when I was disclosing my own diagnosis, that we have this stereotype out there that there are these, you know, autistic superheroes like,
Right.
you know, Bill Gates or characters on TV or,
Right.
you know, people who, you know, say autism is a superpower, which is not something I like very much. And that's setting an unrealistic thing out there for a lot of people. So, and, you know, you can talk to people who'll say, well, we should push autistic people to interact with neurotypical folks more, to go to regular schools, and there are some people for whom that's the right thing. Like you asked me, you know, would I have benefited from a diagnosis? I was probably better off without a diagnosis when I was a child. But, you know, eventually I got to a point where I needed one. And so could science tell us when to push people more to, you know, work on their facial expressions, or
Right.
to teach themselves how to get out of conversations, or to go up to somebody they don't know and start talking? Or whether, you know, they should only go to schools where there are other autistic people, because as you say, they're gonna be happier if they do that. Like, I mean, if we knew more about how to decide that, we could help people even more than we are. Because when I asked, you know, I asked Dave, I said, how do you know, how far you can, when you're trying to get somebody into the workforce, how far you should push them? And he basically said trial and error. And I'm sure if you've got Dave and he's doing your trial and error for you, you know, you're in really, really good hands.
Yes.
But not everybody's gonna have Dave. And so
Right.
how do we get that? It sounds like you're working on some things that are related to this.
And you talked about compassion, and one thing I think is really important as well is trust. So if you want to look at my brain, why do you want to look at my brain? And what are you going to do with that information? Right. And if you want to understand my genetics, why?
Mhm.
And how are you going to use that to
Mhm.
help me? Right. It's a theme all across science,
Yeah,
right? Certainly not exclusive to autism, but a really important consideration when we think about these conversations between groups and specialties is I have to trust that you have the best interest of myself and my community at heart, right?
Yeah.
As we do that work.
and there are plenty of stories in medicine where that hasn't been the case. So
Absolutely.
when somebody is distrustful, I don't think you can do anything other than say, I can understand why you would be. And let me know what I can do to change that.
Right.
Yeah.
Thinking about academic publishing, thinking about autistic people in science, trying to encourage autistic input and voices across these different fields. Are there things that we can do either at the level of publishing or at the level of those of us who support autistic trainees and colleagues, things that we can do to make academic publishing more inclusive of neurodiverse authorship and perspective?
Yeah, we can sure try to make it less complicated. And, boy, it is hard to do. Because you're trying to balance two things at once. One is to disclose as much of the raw data as you can, so that anybody can repeat the experiments And unfortunately, so, you know, when I was a young scientist in the eighties, there was almost usually not any supporting information. Unless you had a crystal structure, you put the crystal structure in the supporting information, but everything was in the paper. So you'd submit your paper and it was gone, you know, you had to Xerox it, of course. And that was it, right? And now you have stuff on Zenodo and code that's on GitHub, and you have the supporting information file that's, you know, 1,000 pages long, and you have papers with 1,000 authors, and then you got to disclose all the conflicts of interest. And, I mean, you know, and we employ a lot of humans to check all that stuff, because when it's wrong and there's a mistake, it can, I mean, a lot of papers where there's mistakes don't have a big impact, but a lot of papers where there's mistakes can have enormous consequences. And so we have to be really careful with that. The thing that gives me hope is that some of that, it appears that one good thing that AI might do for the world is allow us to automate a lot of that, to check that if you say something that the link to your reference works. Eventually, we might even be able to check that if you're saying that there's something in a reference, that it's actually in there. That can go through all these checklists and make sure that you've deposited all the data that you're supposed to deposit, and so if we can automate that on our side, then eventually we'll be able to automate that on the side of the author. And I hope that can make the process a lot less overwhelming for everybody, because, you know, as I was talking to Tim and Jim this morning, you know, Tim was talking about in the business world, a lot of these things that can be overwhelming for an autistic person that we do in the business world. We have to get our travel on Concur, and we have to go in UKG and put our hours in, and we have to watch all these training videos. Like, neurotypical people don't like doing that stuff either. So
Right.
if we can figure out how to streamline all that for everyone, we'll make the world better for everybody. And academic publishing, you know, hopefully can benefit from the same thing one day. But right now, we're having a hard time balancing that against the accountability that we also have to embrace. And so in the meantime, that means that the kinds of programs you have here where people are getting support to do this are probably going to be the short-term solution.
Yeah. As you talk, again, you're very unique in your experiences, or at least in how open you are about your experiences, right? And your willingness to talk about where you've been and where you're going, and you're evolving a kind of idea of yourself in that way. And you had mentioned how in early childhood, it may not have been helpful for you to understand yourself as autistic or have an autistic identity. Thinking back, are there other times in your life where you can think back and say, wow, it's really good I didn't disclose that or know that at that time?
Where it's good that I didn't. Yeah.
And then to put a little bit more context to the question, you know, is there advice that you have for people who are listening to the talk today who know that they're autistic but haven't disclosed that for different reasons?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I do have all these unique perspectives, but as I said, I had access to a lot of resources. You know, my parents could have afforded to get me a diagnosis if I'd wanted one. You know, I'm a nerdy white male, cisgendered, so, you know, I fit the autism stereotype. You know, I'm the first person to win a Rubik's Cube contest. So, you know, I could be a character on a sitcom myself.
It definitely wasn't just, I think, the Big Bang Theory, but please
Yeah.
go ahead.
But, and I went to a private, school that was a parochial school. And it was the same 30 kids in all 9 grades. And Fayetteville's a military town, so some were coming and going, but there are about 15 of us that went through all 9 grades together and still are in contact with each other today. My wife always makes fun of me for having a middle school group chat, but and they were unbelievably supportive of me. Now I was in a rougher and tumbler neighborhood. And actually, one thing that happened to me pretty recently is that somebody from the neighborhood where I didn't fit in nearly as well was tragically ill with ALS and called me a week before he died.
Mhm.
And I was like, hey, man, I don't know why you're calling me, but everybody in Fayetteville's praying for you, and I'm just really honored you would call me and I get a chance to tell you how much people were thinking about you. I wanted to call you, but I wasn't sure whether I should or not. And he had called me to apologize for bullying me when we were children. Yeah. And I kind of remembered that. And so I said, if it's helping you to call me, I'm grateful and I accept your apology, but I just want to tell you how much everybody cares about you. And it was overwhelming in a lot of different ways, but it was a reminder that I didn't fit in with everybody.
Yeah.
And if I'd been in an environment where I wasn't getting as much support as I was getting, then disclosing would have, and knowing my diagnosis could have been a whole lot more important to me than it was. Now, in terms of people who haven't disclosed yet and are trying to decide whether to do so or not, I don't think anybody can tell you whether you should do that. When I did it, I was 60 years old. I was in a very secure position. I'm not planning to go back into administration and do another job where I have to be an extrovert. So, I've got a daughter who's a mental health professional, a son who's a psychologist. I didn't, the risk for me was minimal. And so for me to say to somebody who's 20 years younger, who still has to go in the workplace and all that, I have advice for you. I mean, and they may not have as many resources as I had, and they may not fit the autistic stereotype the same way I do. I don't have any magic advice for people. There is tons of stigma out there for sure. And so that's a decision people have to make for themselves. I can tell people the ways that I've benefited from it. And like I said, it's a relief to me that there are so many ways in which I don't feel compelled to conform anymore. Like, you're interviewing me, but I'm mostly looking at that door and I'm here, so I'm figuring nobody's really dinging me for that. And so that's a huge relief to me. And it's, I was telling my coworkers, I'm hard to read, and you need to be really specific with me, and euphemisms like that. And now I can just tell them I'm autistic. So if you're asking me for something, or you're just trying to tell me something, I don't know the difference between those two things. And I'm more likely to want to go do something if you're here in my office talking to me. And so if that's not why you're here, I need you to tell me. So that is a huge relief. And I work in an environment where everybody's accepting of that. But I could easily be in an environment where that wasn't true.
Yeah.
So I don't think, and even as powerful disability rights neurodiversity activist as Devin Price, I mean, he's got something in Unmasking Autism where he even says, I can't tell you whether to disclose or not. And this is somebody who wants, to have a movement where lots of people are disclosed. So I don't think even there that there's, and I don't think there should be any pressure on anybody. And I haven't interviewed anyone from any part of the spectrum who's said, we should compel everybody to disclose, or we should tell people don't ever do it unless you absolutely have to. I haven't met anybody who has a hard and fast view on this.
I really liked what you said when you were talking about accommodations and change for the world, and I'm maybe gonna poorly summarize you, but it was basically like, when we make the world a better place for autistic people, we're making the world a better place for everybody, right? And the variability, right, that occurs within autism, and then making space for that variability across the different spaces. And I would argue that that is a form of advocacy, at least information giving,
Right.
right, to help people make the informed decision that you've been talking about. We have a few minutes left. I could talk to you for another 3 hours. I'm gonna try to be respectful of our audience. I was wondering if there are people here today who have questions for Dr. Thorp, or if we have questions online.
All right.
Fantastic talk, Holden. Thank you. Dark shades are your best eye contact filter. No one can tell where you are looking. And regarding the rift and controversies, honestly, fantastic talk, Holden. Thank you. Dark shades are your best eye contact filter. Dark shades are your best eye contact filter.
Got it.
No one can tell where you are looking. And controversies, honestly, too much oxygen is being spent on it. Why get stuck in false binaries? Why does it have to be either? Why can't we have both? Autism may seem complex, but the underlying principle is simple. Every autistic person deserves both competent care and genuine belonging.
Yeah, I couldn't say it any better myself.
No, I
That's
couldn't
perfect.
either. That was
Yeah,
perfect.
so, and I agree, Hari, completely that, and I hope we would all work towards the fact that there doesn't need to be an either or, and that, that everybody deserves, what'd you say, competent care and belonging. Yeah, amen to that. And maybe I'll try the dark shades. I can bond with you at least. Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'd like to ask for your perspective and or your opinion on how the research views on autism have changed. Context to that is I moved from Brazil to Vanderbilt to the US 9 years ago. Got here, even at Vanderbilt, I saw a lot of emphasis on research on curing autism. Essentially on eradicating, how do we make sure that no kids are born with autism ever again? And I had the impression that I saw that change dramatically. I don't think that I see a whole lot on neither on research on curing autism, but especially not on like grant calls for research to not so much fix as to just, let's make sure that we understand where this comes from so that we can avoid it in the future. Is that a fair assessment? Have you seen something like, have some change like that?
yeah, I think that it hasn't been that long ago that a lot of people viewed autism as sort of a childhood rare disease. That was like Wilson's disease or, PKU or something where it was monogenic, and if we could have gene therapy, that we could eradicate this one lone mutant from the gene pool. And now we know that it's very, very polygenic, and that many of the forms where people need more support come from de novo mutations that aren't even inherited. And so the chance that we're going to, I mean, there may be a small subset of people with inherited rare mutations that you could still attempt this on, but I think just part of it is just the science moved from thinking that it was a rare inherited disease to something much more complicated.
I had much more hope than that. You make it sound like, oh, we just realized that we can't
Oh.
get rid of it.
Well, yeah,
Do you think that's what it is, or?
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that there are still plenty of, I mean, many biomedical researchers like to cure things. And so, you know, can I say that everyone has given up on that? I don't think so, but because if you look at, well, just look at Autism Speaks as a organization. Now, a lot of people still have harsh feelings about them, but they've moved a lot on this very continuum. And is some of that wholesome? Yeah, they have some more autistic people on their board now, and it's not just parents who are trying to get their kids cured. And Andy Shee, who's the chief scientific officer, has a much more progressive view than his predecessors when it comes to all this. But would they have stayed where they were if it was scientifically possible? I don't know. I don't, that's a psychology question, sociology question, not a science question, but I think it's a mixture of the success of the neurodiversity movement and more sophistication about the science. That would be my assessment. But the end result is a good one because.
Well, that was my question. So
Yeah.
you do have that perception
Uh,
as well?
Yes,
that
I do think there are still a few people, a few labs out there wondering, not so much if you could eradicate. I don't think anybody thinks you could eradicate the genes. That would, I'm not sure that wouldn't be a rational point of view based on the level of complexity. But I think it's a much more holistic view now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. I mean, I got my trial by fire on this, as I was telling Amy, when I was chancellor of UNC, and there was tension between TEACH, which is a famous autism treatment program that's in what we would now call the neurodiversity model, and the genetics labs that were studying it long before I knew I was on the spectrum myself. And I do think things have coalesced a lot since then. Yeah. Yeah, Blythe.
So I'd just really like to get your perspective now in your position, editor of science. No, you don't enter lab anymore, but for someone who's searching for the truth as a scientist, informing now that search as being someone on the spectrum, what do you want to see? What direction you want to see the field go? What kind of papers do you want to wind up?
Oh, yeah. So like I said, I would love it if we combined the best of the behavioral research with the best of the descriptive physical research to help us know more about the right way to direct people based on their profile and what we can learn about them, so that we can not only take the guesswork out of the care, but also make it less, get it to more people, because it's less reliant on individuals, treating individual people. So to somehow get all of that together to come with technology and whatever else we can so that, you know, we can set realistic expectations for folks and get them to the right place as Amy's saying, so that, you know, they can thrive regardless of whether they're gonna build rockets or invent personal computers or just exist as a wonderful person in this world. Yeah.
Zach Warren.
Thanks for fielding all the questions. And I'm wondering, just as a follow-up on that, I'm very interested in sort of, you know, history of science and the words that will use science to describe phenomenon. And I wonder what your perspective is on the word, just autism in general, and its ability to be an amazing supportive word, right, that can open up a realm of resources, but also whether or not you have any perspective on that word is so attempting to describe a heterogeneity that is far too vast for a single word. And as scientists, should we be thinking about ways that we can use different words to continue to be amazingly supportive, but help us journey towards, you know, individualized biobehavioral profiles so that we can give tailored support around school or other things? Just curious what your perspective on coming to this relatively recently on that, our terms, you know?
Yeah. So I think the genetics give everybody a little something and make them uncomfortable on other things, right? So the subtypes are clearly there. I mean, a lot of people are talking about this recent Nature Genetics paper from Olga Troyanovska's lab, shows 4 pretty distinct subtypes in the genetics. And, you know, it's basically Asperger's, PDD, NOS, profound, and then one with a bunch of comorbidities in it. And so in that sense, if you like the idea that there's only one autism, that's a challenge. But on the other hand, the boundaries aren't hard and fast. So once you make these categories, you know, the challenge is when are you on one side of that line or the other? And I think it's also true that, you know, and I was talking with, I guess it was Jim, you know, there are certainly some traits that are clearly go all the way across the spectrum, all the way from profound to people like me. Fixated interest is maybe the easiest one to describe. There are a lot of data out there. So in that sense, absolutely, it's a continuum. And, you know, is there a continuum between me and people who would have gotten a PDD NOS? Oh yeah, I can talk to Temple Grandin for hours. We can talk about our fixated interests, but she had a speech delay, I didn't. And so are we on the same continuum? Absolutely, and I'm sure she would say the same thing about me. So I guess I'm not hung up on any of this. So if somebody still wants to say I have Asperger's, that doesn't bother me. I think the people it does bother, we should do our best to say what they want to be called. I'm also okay, you know, just saying I'm autistic. I think that's the official thing for me to say. You know, we have this challenge with Asperger and whether he was a good person. You know, I only got to interview Steve Silberman once before he died. But one of the things he told me was he was convinced that he had evidence that Asperger didn't do all the horrible things that people are saying about them. And one of the things he was going to do was publish all that. Unfortunately, we'll never get to see that. But I mean, it's kind of like Hari said, you know, why make it either or? Is, you know, are there socially awkward people like me who have communications challenges and no intellectual disability, no speech delay? Are we different from people who do have a speech delay? Are we different from people who are nonverbal? People who have even more support needs? Sure. We're all different, and that's why it's called neurodiversity, and not one thing. So, if the DSM-6 carves them back up again, I could make a pretty good case as to why that's an okay thing to do, and I could make a pretty good case as to why we ought to just leave it like it is. Yeah, but we should focus on taking care of people instead of worrying about all these labels.
I'm curious, since you were married.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, if you could share maybe as you were going through your diagnosis period, what was most helpful, or least helpful from your spouse?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't we, just in the interest of time, why don't you answer this question? And then I wonder if there's one question online.
Fine.
And then we'll end it there.
Okay, perfect, yeah.
Yeah.
So, one of the other reasons why, the biggest reason maybe, that I've been able to do a lot of the things that I've done is I've had a lot of neurotypical partners who have complimented me. And my wife is at the tippy top of that. She is an actress, and she's interpersonally fluent, and she can communicate by moving her body, which I find to be one of the most mysterious things I've ever seen in my life. We've known each other since we were 9, and she married the real me and knew what I was really like, and so the autism thing was not a surprise to her at all. And she's been a huge support to me all along. And it's not only just our marriage and our support of each other, but our complementarity that has been a huge part of that. And every one of so in preparation for writing my book, I asked my 6 most important partners in life, my wife, my brother, and my best friends from all my different phases of my life and career, to fill out the AQ. And the highest any of them got was a 12. So I have had all of these very neurotypical partners who have helped me. And that's why I'm so curious about this. Like, when do we tell people, no, you should go seek out a bunch of neurotypical partners, or no, you'd be better off just being with mostly other autistic people? And there's plenty of research, that Noah Sasson and lots of other people have done that are probing this.
That question, by the way, that question comes up a lot in our work around employment.
Right.
Different kinds of employment.
Yeah, right. So should I join an employment thing where I'm in some kind of situation where there's mostly other autistic people? Or should I go work in an office with a bunch of extroverts and push myself? And yeah.
And it comes up from parents too,
Yeah.
asking about school placement
Right.
for their children.
Yeah.
Just, do you mind sharing the online question with us, please?
It says, I'm in the wrong tab. It says, from Natalie Kidd, many behaviours that arise in children with autism can be tracked back to environmental or systematic stressors. Schools in many ways can be the problem more than the autistic child. Don't I know that? Do you foresee a change in those settings that can make the world more friendly for autistic children?
Wow. Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I mean, like I said, I went to a school that was the opposite of that. And if I'd gone to a rough and tumble public school, I could have had a completely different life course. I did go to a public high school, and the first day is just burned on my mind, as to how stressful it was when I was outside the loving arms of, just to make it even more endearing, the mascot of the school where I went was the leprechauns. So these people who took care of me when I was a kid were all the leprechauns. So once I was away from the leprechauns, I was scared to death. Now, I ended up having an okay time in high school eventually because I found my people. And, you know, they were the nerdy chemistry, students and stuff like that, and the band folks. Yeah, how do we get all of that trauma and lack of support out of the system? I don't know. I mean, we're over here in an education school, so there are people here who know a lot more about that than I do, but boy, it sure would be a thing to strive for, because, and we haven't even, I mean, I have more experience with it, I guess, in the scientific world, because even though the perception would be there are a lot of people on the spectrum who are in science, and it's probably true, there are still a lot of people in laboratories and things who write to me who are suffering because of the challenges that they're having within the world of science. So I don't know, you know, awareness seems to me to be the most important thing at driving this, and the very kind of work that you all are doing. And that's why it's such a privilege to be here to see and hear about all the great stuff that's happening here. So congratulations to you all on that.
Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for being here.
Sure.
Thank you, well, thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
All right, I'm gonna whistle Holden away to his next thing, and thank you all for coming.
I shake your hand.
Oh, yeah.
Really nice to meet
Nice
you.
to see
Thank
you.
you so much.
Oh, you're
for
welcome.
opening